Welcome to the premiere edition of Revisiting a Town of Faith. 8.5 years ago, North TV visited every North Attleboro house of worship, spoke with its clergy, and learned the history of the building and the congregation that worships in it. A 2011 episode featuring Sacred Heart Church was recognized by the Alliance for Community Media as the top spiritual, inspirational program in the nation that year. This is the first episode in the follow-up to that series. As was the case with the original, Revisiting a Town of Faith kicks off with the GraceEpiscopal Church at 104 North Washington Street. The Reverend Mary Alice Sullivan retired in 2014, so we sat down with Deacon Skip Ullman. We have moved inside, and the first thing you'll notice from the original A Town of Faith that we recorded here at the GraceEpiscopal Church is that Mary Alice Sullivan is no longer here at the church, and joining us is Deacon Skip Ullman. Welcome.
Thank you.
To Revisiting a Town of Faith. Mary Alice Sullivan, I know she was loved. What happened?
Well, what usually happens to people as they get a little older, she got to an age where retirement was an option, and clergy aren't necessarily compensated a whole lot, so retirement provided her set income, and then she was able to do additional work as a clergy. And she's currently in the Diocese of Rhode Island, covering some of the parishes right now that are in need of a temporary priest. So.
Well, one of the problems, I guess it would be, when you're a member of the clergy, you're never off the clock.
No, I've often said that being a clergyman is kind of like being in the mafia. You never really get out.
During the intro, I talked briefly about the history of the church. One of the things that I find fascinating, the fire many years ago, up where the choir section is here at this church, and somehow they managed to save that beautiful stained glass window.
That's what I understand. That's what was told to me. I do know the rose window in the back was also of a concern because of the heat from the fire. But they, obviously, I've seen photographs of the damage from the fire. It was quite extensive, and I'm really pleased that they had gone to the effort to restore the church and that part of the church. As it turns out, the emphasis in the church has changed considerably in the last 50 to 60 years, and so much more of the service is now included down in the congregational part of it. So the choir we have now seated to our left, and they're included down on the floor with the congregation. The altar has been brought down. We've actually created a new altar from the old pews that were removed, and we've brought that down, and it now sits in the center of the aisle as well. So that part that was restored is not going to be wasted or lost. It is still used for a lot of things, but for the time being, for corporate worship and whatnot, it is all down here now. But we are going to use that space that had been restored 70 or 80 years ago by bringing in things during the week or perhaps a weekend. We've had quartets, string quartets come in and perform and function as something for the community, but also it's something that brings us a part of the back and forth with the people who live here.
I've been in this church a number of times, and one of the first things I noticed, in addition to Mary Alice not being here, is the fact that, and I can actually count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pews each side of the church were removed in order to bring the altar and the choir down.
That's correct. The original plan was to remove all of the pews and replace them with chairs, so that ultimately one of the considerations was to put the altar right in the center with everybody around it, so
Okay.
that the worship would be in the round. And obviously, we ran out of the money to buy chairs, purchase chairs, and so we're in kind of like this interim stage right now. And if you probably know, the church moves rather slowly. Interim could be centuries. You know, the church moves very slowly, just a little faster than molasses.
The other, and probably most notable, are the new paintings, the Stations of the Cross.
Yes.
They are absolutely beautiful, and the fact that they were painted, as I understand it, by a North Attleboro resident is
Yes.
incredible.
Yes. I don't think it would, I would be chastised for pointing out how they came about. Mary Alice is also a spiritual director and guide, and the woman who did the paintings lost her husband several years ago. And in her counseling, Mary Alice pointed out to the woman who has this talent that perhaps she might find some solace in painting a painting. And so she chose one of the paintings from a book on the Stations of the Cross. And when it was all done, it was the congregation just unbelievably accepted it all. It was just profound. So much so that she made a commitment to paint all of the stations. And she introduced 3 at a time, because as I was told by her as a painter, you don't want the blues to change too much from painting to painting.
Okay.
So she painted 3 at a time so that all of the colors would blend, if you will, as they went along. So about every 3 or 4 months, we would get another 3 put in here. And many of them have little plaques being dedicated to different family members and what have you. So her name, by the way, is Gail Freegan. And she is a resident of North Attleboro, has been for quite some time. And she's just a wonderful part of our community. She is in her own way a minister of this church in the things that she does. But yes, if you look around at them as they're being reviewed, and incidentally, they can be used at any time. People can come in off the street as long as the church is open, and they're more than welcome to walk around and meditate on them. During Lent, we're going to be doing Stations of the Cross on Wednesday nights at 6:30. So we're going to open that up and invite people of the community, if they want to be a part of that as well.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, she's extremely talented.
She is, and she's not only constantly studying and learning, but she is an accomplished teacher as well. People come from New York and all over for a whole week. They stay at her house while she teaches them technique and what have you. So it's very profound. Yeah.
Tell us about the actual church services. Born and raised, still a Roman Catholic. Any similarities between the services?
Yes. As a matter of fact, what a lot of people probably do not realize, unless they are part of the Episcopal Church, is that the Episcopal Church is a spin-off from the Anglican, or the Church of England, which is pretty much just the Catholic Church with a different head of the church. Henry VIII died with the title Defender of the Faith. The Pope never took that away from him. So our church services, while have been in the vernacular from the beginning of time, they are almost the exact same wording as the Catholic Mass. We have more than one canon of the Mass, but there is one in particular that's almost word for word. So the primary service of the Episcopal Church is the Holy Communion, the Mass, the Eucharist. It can be named a number of different things, but it is basically the same, where a priest is required to consecrate bread and wine into the body and blood of Jesus Christ. that is the basic service that the Episcopal Church revolves around. Previously, there was an order of worship during the day, which evolved from the monastic community. And what happened after the Revolution, a lot of the Anglican clergy had sworn an allegiance to the monarch, and so they were told to come home. So those who are following the Church of England in the United States, at that time, the colonies, found themselves without clergy. Very few of the priests of the Church of England stayed, they went back. So the Episcopal Church that was already well established found itself without priests. And so for the longest time, services were led by lay people. And one of those services is morning prayer, and others evening prayer. They can be led, and they are led by lay people. There is an opportunity for there to be not only the lessons, but perhaps a sermon or a homily on those lessons. And it is a way for the parish to continue to maintain its collective worship and communion until such time as a priest can be found. And we're somewhat in that position right now. We have a priest who is assisting us by performing what they call supply services. She comes in on most Sundays and conducts the Mass, performs the Mass. On those Sundays when she cannot, then I or one of the other lay people will perform the morning prayer service. And we also include a sermon based upon the readings for that particular Sunday. And that's where we're at right now. The primary service, of course, is the Eucharist, and then we have the morning or evening prayer services as well. Might say too that weddings and funerals and baptisms continue, and I, as an ordained clergy, am permitted to do those things. So, should they arrive, when they arrive, if a priest is not available, then I'm called upon to do that.
Sounds very familiar to a friend of mine, and people who watch North TV certainly know Del Malloy, who does color commentary on high school athletics with me. He is an ordained, permanent deacon in the Roman Catholic Church.
That's what I am. Permanent or yeah.
As opposed to a transitional deacon, which will eventually become a priest.
Right.
But Del Malloy, when there is a visiting priest coming into St. John's Church in Attleboro, when that priest, for whatever reason, doesn't show up, it's just like the Mass, except he's using Eucharist that has already been consecrated,
right.
And he does not have the power to consecrate.
Right. It's the diaconate in the Episcopal Church and the Catholic Church are exactly the same. We're called from the congregation or from the people to be ordained to a specific ministry, which is primarily service and outreach to the community. So many of my classmates, when I went through seminary, are chaplains. One of them conducts the liturgy in the park in downtown Providence. So they're one and the same. It's too long ago now so that nobody can hold anybody accountable. I used to conduct services at a nursing home in Rhode Island. I used Rhode Island. And alternating every other Sunday with a Catholic deacon. And he would call up and he says, "Skip," he says, I can't make it. He says, "Can you cover for me?" So I would do the Catholic service with his communion. And everybody was happy about it, back and forth. You know, things might have tightened up a little bit with a new bishop, but that's the way it was. Deacons more concerned about ministering to the people than worrying about the hierarchy.
Well, if the Episcopal service is anything like the Catholic service, there's at least one collection and maybe two per week.
Oh, well. We have just the one.
Okay.
I tease the people.
I might want to convert then.
When we do a communion service, when a deacon does the liturgy from the reserved sacrament, I always tease the congregation, I said they like to come to them because they're shorter. Because there's no consecration part of the Mass
Yes.
is eliminated, and so it's much shorter. So,
How long is a typical service?
well, we have this little joke on the frontal of our altars, there's an IHS, but that's actually a 1. It means 1 hour service. No. A service, typically a Mass, typically is an hour long.
Okay.
That's with the music and all. If you have what you call like a Saturday night service, which we used to have here, they last customarily 30, 35 minutes because it's covering everything that's necessary and making sure that all that is available is provided without any of the trappings and extra stuff. So it's basically 35 minutes for a Mass without music, and it goes to about an hour. Occasionally we'll have a visiting priest. We have to remind them that the sermon shouldn't last too long. As a matter of fact, at my ordination, my pre-ordination retreat, the bishop met with us all and said, you have to understand one thing, after 10 minutes you've lost it. So get it in the first 10 minutes, or you've lost them. I don't know how these ministers did it 150 years ago with 200 minutes of sermon.
Well, simpler times. I've always found, and I'm sure you can relate to this, you try to listen, you're trying to listen, you're listening, then all of a sudden you say, geez, I never noticed that spot on the ceiling before. And when you're giving a sermon and you see this, you've gone too long.
That's it.
Let's talk about you.
Okay.
How did you become involved as a permanent deacon?
Oh, golly. I at first felt called to the permanent diaconate, actually before it existed. And when I applied to the diocese, they really weren't quite sure what to do with me. So they said, you can read for orders, which is, they still can do it, very rarely now. But they said you can read for orders, which meant I could study under a mentor for a certain number of years by reading and back and forth, training, what have you, with my mentor, and ultimately get to the point where I would be examined and allowed to be ordained. Well, I got all the way up to that point.
Now, how old were you at the time?
At the time, I was in my about mid-30s.
Okay.
Right. And I got to that point, and then the diocese didn't know what to do with me because I'd met all the requirements, but yet they really didn't have the thing called permanent deacons. So what the church does when it doesn't know what to do, it does nothing. And so I just kind of sat there for a while.
Because they're slow as molasses.
Yeah. And what happened was there was a turnover at the church. Our bishop died suddenly, and a new bishop was called who came in from California. And they had a school in California for deacons. And he was interested in introducing the diaconate to Rhode Island. And so he found out that I was performing ministry as a layperson and had seen evidently my folder with all of the training that I already had. And he said, I'm going to start a school. He said, would you be interested in going? And I told him, yes, I would. So he told me to hang tight, be patient, and lo and behold, within a year, they started the school. And I went. It was a residency on weekends, and I'd leave on a Friday afternoon when I get home from work, and I'd be there until Sunday afternoon, sometime around 5. I'd get home, have a bite to eat, say hi to my kids, and then I was off to work the next day. But I did that. It was a 3-year program, 6 semesters, and I was ordained along with 13 of my classmates, and that was in 1985.
Now, mid-30s, I assumed you were already married at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what did your wife think about you getting the call?
She was very, very supportive. So much so, like I said, she not only ran a household, she was a registered nurse, pediatric nurse, and worked half-time at Rhode Island Hospital, Hasbro. And She was a saint. She took care of the household, you know, disciplined the children and everything while I was working full-time, going to school full-time. I should say I finished up my final semester of graduate school. I was going full-time to seminary. So she was a saint. She put up with an awful lot, and as a result, kind of left the road open so that I could move along. So I'm very grateful to her for that.
Which, of course, brings us to another big difference between the Roman Catholic Church and the Episcopal Church. Well, we certainly knew this from Mary Alice being here. You don't need to be a male, and you don't need to be a single celibate male.
No, but deacons can, in the Catholic Church, be married.
Yes, yeah.
No matter, but the one thing I found in the Diocese of Providence, the Catholic diocese, were that the spouse of the deacon student had to be part of
The training?
They had to go to the classes with their husband, you know.
Wow.
I don't know if that's the case in Massachusetts, but I do know in Rhode Island, every deacon, now, as far as I'm concerned, the wife should have been ordained too.
Yes,
They went through
that's a
the
good
same.
point.
They went through the same process, but I guess the thought process was that they wanted to have the wife understand fully what their husband was going through. And the only thing is, that limited families that were primarily older, that didn't have children, that needed to be babysat and what have you. So the deacons in the Catholic Church, to my knowledge, were quite a bit older than we were.
No,
For that reason.
I know you're certified in Rhode Island. You were at one time in Massachusetts,
Right.
but
Can
special dispensation to preach here in Massachusetts?
Canonically, I'm resident in Rhode Island.
Okay.
In Rhode Island, I'm a full-fledged, whatever you want to call me. When I moved to Massachusetts, I was in a different jurisdiction. And so I had to apply to the Diocese of Massachusetts to function as a deacon in Massachusetts. I'm a deacon no matter where I go, but in order to perform and function as a deacon, I need to have the license of the Diocese of Massachusetts. So when I moved to Massachusetts, which was about 15 years ago, I applied and received license to function as a deacon. And deacons in the Episcopal Church move around. They don't stay in one parish for very long. As a matter of fact, in Rhode Island, the average is approximately 3 years. And so when I moved here, got licensed and functioned with Mary Allison, great team, working out fine. I got a call from the bishop one day that he wanted to speak with me. So I went in, and when all of the pleasantries were out of the way, the bishop says to me, "You know, Skip, our deacons move around." I said, "They do in Rhode Island." And he said, "Well, we're going to have to move you." I said, "Oh, I don't want to move." He says, "Well, you got to move." I said, "Is there any way I can stay without being subordinate?" And he said, insubordinate. He said, "Well, you could retire." So I said, "Okay, I'm retired." So then with a wink of an eye, as you get from some of the wiser bishops, with a wink of an eye, he says, "Of course, if Mary Alice needs you and she invites you to assist her, you know, by all means, knock yourself out." So nothing changed except my status. I became quote unquote retired, which means, you know, I get paid even less than I get paid now.
Which I know what deacons make. They don't make a heck of a lot.
No, but the fringe benefits are wonderful.
Oh, they are. They are, that's for sure. It looks good on your resume moving up to the next level, that's for sure. Future of this church, you mentioned visiting priest.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a replacement for Mary Alice. Will there be, two-part question, will there be, and when might we see a priest come here? And the future of this church and organized religion as a whole, millennials just aren't going to church.
No, it's at least not the mainstream churches. I'll start with the first. This parish has had what's known as a priest in charge for 3 years, which was a priest that came here with a contract for up to but not to exceed 3 years. At that point, we had the option of maintaining, having the priest remain or letting them go. And that's what we did. And we're in a precarious position right now as far as the diocese is concerned. The diocese requires a certain level of compensation to the rector of a church. And we are at a point right now, quite frankly, where we're not able to do that fully. So we're in a process of, what's the word I'm looking for? Discernment. We're looking for where we might be going, how we might be going. There were 3 different options at one time. Sell the church, the proceeds would be put into escrow, and we would try to find another place, that sort of thing. Another is, okay, well, we could continue to do the service, but on a shorter schedule and what have you. But the problem with that is each time you shrink, it gets smaller by definition, and it really is not the way to go. The sermon that I preached on yesterday was that, the church is not really in the business of being a business. We're in the business of, being the voice of God. And I said we can never lose track of that. And if doing that means that, we have to give up the building, so be it. But, we have to be true to the calling of the parish. Have the needs changed in the last 160 years? I think so in a lot of ways, but the basic need is still there. We might look different, we might be different, but the basics are still going to be the same. So where will it be? I don't know, to be honest with you. I pray every day that we'd be able to maintain what we have. We just have a new tenant moving into the buildings that we made, the building we made into office space. So we'll see how that goes. That might be enough to support the requirements for a new priest to be assigned here. We'll see on that. That's open to discussion in God. I'll leave that up to him. Whatever. The other part, millennials. Your friends who have visited, I think, are in that category. I won't embarrass them by asking them where they go or what they do, but things have changed, and I think if the church doesn't change, they're going to find smaller and smaller numbers. You can go to some of these churches and you find the parking lot is full, they're overflowing, they seem to have no trouble with the process of collections, and you have to ask yourself every so often, what is it they're doing that we're not doing? And I'm not saying that you take success and copy it, because it doesn't work. It's not something that can work that way. But they're addressing needs and interests of young people in their 30s with children, and we have to find what that need that's being met is and offer it as well. We do have small families here, young families, I should say, and they like it here. They wouldn't want to go anywhere else. But we're not getting people coming off the street and, saying, I saw wonderful things happening here and I want to be a part of it. So that's something we have to work on.
Well, it's one of the reasons why we have this series to educate viewers about the different faiths in the North Attleboro area, and hopefully they'll take part. Deacon Skip, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. I know I chewed your ear off.
Oh, it's sensational. I love hearing the stories. That wraps up this edition of Revisiting a Town of Faith. Next up will be the First Baptist Church, coming up in 2 months here on North TV. Thank you for watching.